Thanks for having me on the podcast, Aaron. It's so exciting to be on a podcast that has the word data in its name. It's like, wow, I think I'm a fit for this. Most people that get into real estate start, with either private lending, or maybe they do a fix and flip, or maybe they buy a rental. In my case, I got into real estate in reverse. My first project was a $6 million new construction, custom built Apple style campus that that tech company built for us. And the way it happened was, I'd been running a company for 12 years, and it had grown by leaps and bounds. Our staff count was up 20x from when I started, and we were doing so well that eventually the CEO of the company and the senior partner, I was a junior partner, said, we are not going to be renters. We want to be landlords. We want to do this ourselves. And I'm like, yes, that's really an awesome idea. And he's like, you're going to build our new campus. And I'm like, what? I haven't even rehabbed my own house. What are you talking about? I don't know anything about this. We can't build anything from scratch. And no. Don't worry about it. I know a lot about it. I'll mentor you. And he did. I mean, he knew tons. And so, basically that started this 12-month time frame in 2003. It was nightmarish while I went through it, because we were running this company that was growing 30% year over year, which already is very hard to do. So 8 to 6 we run a company, and then 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. we're real estate guys planning and building a campus from scratch while running our company. And I have to tell you, I bitched and I moaned and I complained in every way possible for 12 months. And I haven't stopped thanking Paul for the last 16 years. I mean, it was such a incredible learning experience. I look at these syndicators, they've been buying multifamily for 10 years, and they don't know how to build one from scratch, right? And I have that experience of actually knowing things like, what is the air conditioning and cooling flow for a particular area? What are the fire door requirements? I mean, there's a million things in the background. People know that there are rules, but they don't know why these rules exist. And so I had this incredible fortune of starting my real estate journey with this. It's almost like a master's degree in real estate construction in real time, right? Lab only, no theory, right? And so that's how I got started. And then it just sort of, the ball sort of rolled from there. So it was in Fremont, California, which is Silicon Valley. And they're like, just as you're done with their book of rules, they're like, oh, but we wrote this new book last week. Wait, we're going to send it to you now, right? So that's California for you. So one of the biggest things I learned from that, and by the way, we ended up building 6 campuses, right? That was kind of just the beginning, because it was such an explosive success for our business to build a custom campus for our needs. It drove our business. Like real estate usually doesn't drive technology businesses, but in this case it did. And so we ended up, building or partially building 6 different campuses. As we were building those out, I learned that it's a terrible idea to be building anything in California. So while I love California, I live in California, now when I'm building a 240 unit, I'm building a 117 unit. They're all outside California because they're so much easier to build and the risk is so much lower. Well, I did a weird switch. So I went commercial, then single family, then small multifamily, then very large multifamily, right? So it was kind of 4 steps. And I'll tell you my story, actually, that part of my story is interesting. So I love telling that. So I see all this stuff that's happening with this commercial building. I see the depreciation. I'm like, this is insane, man. The benefits in real estate are almost like cheating, right? This is the first time I've really been exposed to this. And guys like me, the big fat tech salary people, right? We're making a lot of money, but not keeping a lot of money, right? We're giving 50% of it away to California and to the feds. And so all of a sudden I start seeing the depreciation benefits. I'm like, ooh, this is awesome, right? And so by the time I get to that point where I have the money to invest in it, it's already late 2008. So the world's falling apart. All sorts of bad things are happening. My family's telling me that I'm the world's greatest idiot for looking into real estate. And I'm like, no, numbers. And they're like, what numbers? You're an idiot. No, don't buy real estate, right? So my family pretty much disavows me because they know that late in 2008, all of my evening time is spent doing research into real estate, right? All like data stuff. And I keep throwing Excel spreadsheets at them and they keep throwing 4-letter words at me, right? So this is kind of goes on for a while and eventually they just stop talking to me. And I'm like, look, I don't think that these guys get the numbers. The numbers are like incredibly powerful. So what I do is I'm like, I need to get numbers and I don't know if property radar existed back then, but I couldn't find the data. What I was looking for was a very specific piece of information. I had heard that when real estate goes up, it goes up way further than it should, right? Bubble. When it comes down, I'd also heard that it goes down too far, right? It goes down beyond where it should. So it's a natural sort of up and down thing. And so I was like, I need to find a piece of data, which is what I need to know every city in the US. What was the 2005 peak price, or maybe 2006? And what is the 2008 December trough, right? So what is that delta? Because that delta shows me which cities in America are good to invest in. Now, there's probably 10, 15 better ways of doing that, but back then I was just beginning, right? I didn't know what I didn't know, but that was actually a pretty good way of investing in 2008. So what I do is I go to this Ukrainian hacker on Upwork.com, right, which was called something else back then. I think it was called Odesk or something like that. So I go to this guy and I'm basically like, there's this website called Zillow, and I want you to basically spider their 3,300 cities. And somewhere in there, there's a graph which shows, their peak and their trough. And I want you to basically get that data and put it in Excel. And I was like, it's probably going to take this guy a month. Well, I got my lesson in the power of technology, because 12 hours later, an Excel spreadsheet with 3,300 cities arrived in my, in my Excel. So the first thing is like, God, please don't send the FBI to my door for crashing the Zillow website. And luckily, luckily we didn't crash it, right? But he must have been on it like all night to get that much data out in a single day. So all I did was, I mean, this is where the power of data really started to amaze me, and it's never stopped amazing me. So I click on the button that basically shows the max fall, right, from 2005 to 2008. It ends up being a Californian city. Right? So I've never heard of this city. It's 144 miles from my home in Northern California, Madera, California. So I Wikipedia it, and it turns out that it's 20 miles north of Fresno. Basically, a lot of the people that live there work in Fresno, so on and so forth. It's an agricultural area with lots of farms around it. I'm like, okay, Madera, California. So this happens to be a Friday. So I jump into my car. It's Saturday now. I'm driving 144 miles. I show up in Madera. And I spend the entire day talking with people and real estate agents in Madera, developers, brokers. And here's what I learned. I learned that all of these homes that are being sold in Madera are all brand new. They were all built in 2005, 2006 by Kaufman and Broad, right? One of the big dude builders. And what these builders did is basically, when these homes were ready, they had all these agricultural workers working around. They called them in and did these no income show loans. And basically they sold like 5,000 of these homes. And now pretty much that entire section of the city was empty, because all those workers by 2008 had figured out these are not going to go up, they're going to go down. So they all left, right? So like a section of Madera, brand new, like even the roads were like dark black, right? They were all new.
Wow.
Was mostly empty, like 90% plus empty. So I go and see a developer and I say, how much does this home cost? I mean, it's available to me. If I want to buy 10 of them, I can buy them for $90,000 each. He says it cost me $180,000 just to build it. So I'm like, but how can it then be selling for 90,000? He says, they're not worth 90,000, Neal, but you don't understand the problem. There's only one problem. There's no tenants. If you had tenants right now, if you could figure that out, you would be very, very rich, right? And I'm like, that really stuck with me. So I'm like, I'm driving back, 144 miles all the way. I'm like, how do I get people to come from 22 miles away, right? 22 miles away. How do I get all these people? There's all these beautiful homes. So next morning, I call up a bank in Madera and I tell them, I want to buy 10 of these properties, but I can't, I'm going to put them in contract, and then I need timeline. I need time. I need, 60 to 90 days. And the banks are like really friendly back then. They're in so much trouble. So they're like, oh yeah, sure. We'll put 10 of them in contract for you. And you can kind of walk around and do stuff. Okay. I'm like, this is great. So then I drive the next Saturday to Fresno, which is 20 miles further than Madera. And I go there, I see an agent, I sit down with him and I say, I want to buy a property in Madera, in Fresno, but I don't want it to be new. I want it to be old, like 20, 25 years old. Not like falling apart old, because I am buying it, but like, not one of the newer properties you have in Fresno. So he's like, no, we've got better deals on the newer side. And I'm like, no, please don't give me any new one. I have a reason. I want an older property for a reason. So the guy says, okay, we go and buy this property, in like 3 or 4 days, it's done, $110,000, old 1994 property. So then I go back to the Ukrainian hacker. Remember the Ukrainian hacker that hacked Zillow for me? So I go back to him and said, I have this home that I now own in Fresno. I want you to give me like an astonishingly large number of tenant leads. And he's like, why do you want so many tenant leads? You've only got one property. I'm like, no, I actually have 10 more properties to sell. I need a huge number of leads. So the guy basically does all of his hacks. He goes to all these websites like showmetherent.com, Cozy, and all these sites that we haven't even heard of. And he uses all his hacks to basically put that one address in like 55 different ways, right? So normally you can only put one address one way, but he figures out like here, if I add a semicolon, I can add the property again. If I add like an asterisk here, I can add it again. And before I know it, I'm receiving like my email box is just filled with hundreds and hundreds of leads. So then I realize there's no way I can process these leads. There's too many of them. So I go back to the Ukrainian guy and I say, do you have any people that can get on the phone and process leads for me? Like, no, Ukrainians don't speak English well, but there's this Filipino lady that we hire from time to time. She's really good. So I go after the Filipino lady, again, using Upwork.com, and I hire her 8 hours a day. We get her an American number that is kind of a Madeira number. Mm-hmm. And we tell her, hey, you're going to basically process all these people. And she's like, okay, what's my pitch? Well, pitch is this. Well, that Fresno one is leased out, right? So sorry, you were too late. But we have 10 brand new homes, beautiful. They're not 3-bedroom, they're 4-bedroom, and they're $400 less, right? And people are like, really? That's awesome. Yes, but they're 22 miles away in Madeira. Oh, no, I don't want to go to Madeira. I'm a Fresno person. So if somebody said no, right, our pitch was we would offer them a $25 gift card to go just to Madeira to check this home out. And, no other obligations. And if they said no, we would then bump it up to $50, right? And if they said yes, we would immediately schedule an appointment and save our $25. So she does this all day long, calling all these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of leads that this house in Madeira is getting. And so a little bit of bait and switch, but I'm offering something much better, right? So 30 days later, without me having purchased any of these properties, they're all in contract, right? All those people from Madeira have visited, all those Fresno people have basically gone there. Once they go there, they realize that nobody's ever lived in these homes. They're all brand new. They're beautiful. Kaufman and Broad makes very good looking homes. And so I have 10 tenants. And on day one, I have an astonishing amount of cash flow because you're buying these things for $90,000. The tenants are paying you, whatever, $1,200. And at the end of it, I couldn't believe that I'd actually pulled this off, but I did. And I made the greatest mistake of my life right there. I listened to my loan broker. He said, you can only buy 10 homes. So I only bought 10. What he should have said is, you can only get conventional loans on 10. This other guy over there will let you buy as many as you want. And so I still own most of these. And so that's how I got into the single family side of things, right? So that's just how did I go backwards from commercial to single family part of the story? I think that the data-driven side keeps you sane, because obviously if my family, all these experienced people are telling me that I'm an idiot, it is going to affect me. Being data-driven doesn't mean that I'm a robot. So I'm thinking maybe I'm wrong. But then when you look back at the data and you look at, okay, where were people 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago that were buying all these homes compared to where I am today, the data was basically saying your situation is you can't lose. You may not win, but there's no way to lose from this situation, right? That there's no way that you would, if you rented these homes, you couldn't lose. And so eventually my family, of course, came around to it. They went out to Madeira. They bought a bunch of homes. They now all own them. But it was interesting, and it was definitely terrifying, to kind of take that leap of faith, and especially do it for 10 of them. Oh yeah, a year later they were all beating me up for not letting them in before they did. It's like, now things are too expensive, Neal. You should have gotten us in before. What happened is, so I'm doing this stuff on data, and I really begin to understand that there's not enough people dealing with data in real estate, because being in technology, you're used to like data sources being very clean and very available, and people are doing different things. Property Radar was starting up, and Housing Alerts was there, and some of these places are pretty expensive. So I came up with this concept that I want to be like a Wikipedia of data. I want to just give it away. I don't want to have like a business model attached to it. I just want to give it away. And then that initial idea morphed. And so eventually I was like, I don't want to be the Wikipedia of data or real estate data, because it's too much work. I'm too lazy for that. So what I said is, What I want to do is I want to put together an investing toolkit, something that's straightforward and simple that makes it easy for investors to figure out where to invest. And I want to give that away, right? And initially it was just because back in 2008, 2009, I was very heavily influenced by Wikipedia and Craigslist, two models of basically, giving stuff away, right? Craigslist could have sold to eBay for $2 billion, but they said, yeah, but you're gonna make everything paid. Everything's free right now on Craigslist. So they didn't, and that influenced me. So I was like, I have to find a way to build like an easy toolkit, right? And then start giving that away. So I started doing my research, and as you can imagine, I go back to the Ukrainian hacker, and this time we basically start getting data sets. So we start pulling data sets from the Department of Labor website, we're pulling them from Zillow, and basically anybody that has open data, we're just pulling it all together and creating this 3,000 city data set. And then what I start doing is I put it into a statistical analysis software, and I'm like, I'm going to just crank this and keep throwing things into it and seeing which things affect profit the most, right? So it's like, I'm going to throw in population. Does that affect profit, population growth? Oh yeah, there's an effect. But how much does it affect it? Okay, I'm going to pull population out, and now I'm going to throw in job growth. How much of a spike in profits occurred there? Then I'm going to throw in crime. I'm going to throw in schools. I'm going to throw in home price growth. I'm going to throw in poverty levels. I'm going to throw in all these different things, and then I'm going to figure out which ones of those matter the most. And then I'm going to take out the stuff that's redundant. Like schools matter, but if I take schools out and keep the rest of them in, does it still show me the same data? Does it still show me the same good cities in the same neighborhoods? So I ended up taking some stuff out because the other stuff that was in there was already giving me the appropriate result. So this went on for a while, and we basically started doing it. And while I was doing this, right, somebody approached me because I was running this technology company. It was a technology school. I had large classrooms. They came in and said, we want to open a meetup. And this is like 2010, something like that. And meetups were a brand new thing back then because the company had just opened up. And so they're like, yeah, we want to run a real estate meetup, and you have classrooms, right? So you have internet access, projectors. And I'm like, come on in, I'll show up as well. So initially I show up to these 6 o'clock meetups, which are 150 feet from my office, right? Very convenient, and start learning. And then eventually one day, I start talking about all this jambalaya that I'm doing with the statistic stuff. And I start talking about it, and people there in the room are really interested. They're like, why don't you present on this? And I'm like, no, I'm not a real estate guy. So they're like, who cares? I mean, you've got something interesting, go present on it. So next month they don't find a speaker, which happens a lot with meetups. So they basically, a day before, they call me and say, why don't you just talk and just tell people about what you're people. And I'm like, 4 or 5 people are going to show up, but they had sent it out with a description from me, and like 50 people show up, and they're all like nerds like me, like total geeks, right? Bunch of dorks in the room that are like, wow, this guy's doing something interesting. So I tell them the rules that I've come up with, and somebody in the room said, you need to give this a name. So eventually I called it the real focus system. Just 5 minutes of work, and we call it this real focus system. They're like, what do you want to do with it? Do you want to create a company? I'm like, no, I don't want to create a company. I just want to give it away. And so like, that's great. So that goes well. And then somebody that was in the room realized that I was giving it away and called me onto his meetup. So I went and taught at his meetup in San Jose. And before I knew it, people were calling me for conferences. And these days, of course, it's podcasts. But back then it was conferences. And so eventually I gained some notoriety as like this data geek guy that goes around talking about data, but he does it in an interesting sort of way, so people like it. And he points to cities and neighborhoods that are appropriate for real estate investment and others that are not. That was my focus. And so, I mean, it just sort of between 2010 and 13, this sort of just kept snowballing. And I started keeping a database of all the people that were coming to my meetups, and that database kept building and building and building. And by the time 2012, 2013 came around, and I really got into multifamily, and from a professional perspective. Until then, this is all while I'm running my tech company. But we sold our tech company in 2013. So I was like, okay, what's next, right? For years, people have been saying, we'd like to invest with you. I'm like, no, I'm a tech guy. You can't invest with me, right? And now it's like, maybe I should invite people in. So I start doing projects. And from the very beginning, multifamily seemed more interesting to me than single family. And when I did that, those people did want to invest with me. They liked the geek approach of looking at cities and neighborhoods. And so the transition actually became fairly smooth. So once we bought our first multifamily, it's been a long time, 237 units, things just got rolling, and now we're about 2,000 units of multifamily, about 500 investors, about $270 million. So, and now we're adding asset classes. So we're adding industrial, we're adding public storage, we've added student housing, looking to add senior housing at some point. So it all seemed really planned, but it was completely chaotic as it happened. So that's kind of the next piece to it. I should have started with new multifamily construction, but I didn't. I was afraid that, because some of these projects were 20 or 30 million dollars. So the first 4 that we did were not ground up. They were just value add. We were buying old multifamilies and improving them. But the last 5 projects that we've done, 3 of them have been ground up multifamily construction. So eventually I ended up where I started in a different sort of professional fashion. But yeah, that's where we ended up. And that real focus system sort of blew up to the point where one day somebody came in and said, this thing is really powerful, but all this meetup stuff, it only gets you fans in the San Francisco Bay Area. Sure, you get some through podcasts, but if you want this system to go national, you need a platform that's really big. So we walk around asking people, what's a big platform if you want to give something away for free, like a system that allows you to figure out the best cities in the United States. And I think 30-40% of the people came up with, there's this website that gets 100 million hits a day called udemy.com, right? Take this course, make a video out of it, add some labs, and stick it on udemy.com and give it away for free. And I'm like, okay, that sounds like a good idea, right? Again, if there was a podcast back then, maybe that's what I would have done. But I went the Udemy route. And initially, I'm like, if I get 1,000 people a year, I'm going to be really, really pleased. And now there's 6,000 people taking the course, right? And it became the most popular real estate course on udemy.com simply because it was always free and there was no pitch, right? At the end of the course, there's no toolkit, there's no next step, there's no, if you do this, you will get X, Y, and Z. It isn't there. In fact, what's funny, Karen, is every week I get one email at least saying, so at the end of this, you didn't tell us what to buy. And I'm like, this was meant to be a gift. You got it. You don't have to come back and talk to me about it. Udemy doesn't even give me your email address, so I don't know how to talk to you, right? So it's interesting how it became very popular. And the big thing that came out of it was that the national conference circuit then sort of accepted me. So I started teaching at conferences. Last year, we did about 18 conferences. This year, we'll do more because they're virtual. So there's just more conferences this year. Sure. I update it once in a year. So what I discovered after all this massaging of data in this statistical software was the 5 things that matter at the city level were population growth, job growth, income growth, home price growth, and crime reduction, right? So once again, population growth, job growth, income growth, home price growth, and crime reduction, right? And one could say, well, there's schools there's poverty level. But what I found was, if I was ending up with a mix of cities, and then I would throw in more stuff and end up with the same mix of cities, well, that would make the product more complicated. And my goal was, because it is free and always meant to be free, I want it to be simple. It's like, you should be able to pick some random city that you've never heard of, apply the system in less than 10 minutes, and be able to say things like, Fort Myers has really low population growth, but it's got decent job growth. But 5 miles away, Cape Coral has phenomenal numbers, much better than Fort Myers. You should be able to say that while never having talked about Cape Coral or Fort Myers. So that 10-minute benchmark meant that I had to give up on being truly comprehensive. I didn't have every single metric that helps job growth, but the key ones that were driving profits, the key one were those 5. Okay. And then over the years, people came back and said, your system is incomplete because this only counts at the city level, and all great cities have lots of crappy neighborhoods. So you need to basically design a second set that's designed for neighborhoods. So then we went back and updated the Udemy course and built an entire new section that had 5 benchmarks for neighborhoods, right?
Interesting.
So,
okay.
So we did that. And to me, to be honest, the neighborhood section was more powerful
Really?
because you can really, I mean, you can, you can go into a great city like Phoenix, and a mile and a half from Phoenix is the county jail. I can tell you, I wouldn't be seen there after 5 p.m. I mean, that's a really nasty area. So the key thing was, I was telling people, here's a bunch of benchmarks that allows you to compare cities that you shouldn't be investing in, like Detroit, with cities that you should be investing in, like a bunch of cities in Utah or a bunch of cities in Idaho, right? But I'm not telling you where in that city to go. And so eventually, it took a lot more work, but we managed to figure out 5 metrics for neighborhoods as well. Some of them are the same. So the neighborhood metrics, and our goal was basically cash flowing investment. So we weren't trying to basically be the end all of real estate. We were trying to say, by that time I had a pretty big audience, and my audience was into cash flowing real estate. So instead of giving them just a fixed numbers, I gave them ranges. Because, for example, I said the median household income in your neighborhood should be between 40 and 70,000, okay, for you to invest in it. And they're like, well, what happens if it's higher than 70,000? Is that a bad thing? And I said, no. But once you go over $70,000 in income, that's a B plus neighborhood. And because there's so much appreciation in a B plus neighborhood, your cash flow is going to diminish down, right? So if you want cash flowing neighborhood, that is your range. At 70, it sort of peters out. Beyond that point, you'll have trouble making cash flow work. And if you're an appreciation based investor, if you're rich, you don't mind sitting on it, stay above 70. That's fine. But the system also was showing people exactly how to figure out the 40, 50, 70 range of income for each neighborhood. Like, how do you go and figure out this information for a neighborhood, right? All of that was part of the system. It was part of the course. So we did that. Then we did poverty level. We found that any time in any neighborhood in the US, if the poverty level is above 20%, the delinquency spikes and the retention rate falls a lot, right around 20%. So the rule that we set was, try to stay below 15% on the poverty level side, and you'll see long stay times, and you'll see low delinquency. So delinquency seemed very tied to poverty level, because if people are poor, they've only got this month's money in the bank, this month's rent. So anything happens, like their car breaks down, they don't pay rent, right? So you want to stay away from that. And so you don't want to go into areas with high poverty levels, even if the rent growth there is very high. So stuff like that was part of the neighborhood system. And the neighborhood system really made us take off. I mean, people just absolutely adored what we were doing, and they were coming back and giving us feedback. Some people went and corrected our system and came and said, you made a mistake here, and we corrected that. Then we had to issue an update for student housing, because if you have a neighborhood that's student housing, all of our numbers were wrong. Why? Because students' incomes are at zero. There were all these perfectly good neighborhoods that our system was saying are crap, right? And then obviously our system was wrong. And so we had to basically come back and say, students, here's this place where you go and you check to see what percentage of the people living here are students, and you've got to adjust for that, right? Otherwise, you're just going to miss the boat on some of these really nice areas. So those sorts of things, but it was all community driven, email driven. People kept sending emails. Now, if you go to udemy.com, we have 500 5-star reviews, and so yeah, it sort of, that really helped me get into the multifamily side, because people would go to udemy.com, take the course, and then they would basically ask the inevitable question, thank God, which was, so Neal, what are you doing in terms of investment? I actually had something to offer. And so as I started telling people about projects, I started getting more and more investors. So it became a fairly large size community. Yes, because people then eventually said, but you're a multifamily guy and you have this system called the Real Focus system that really has nothing to do with multifamily. And I was like, no, this system works equally well for single family and multifamily. But the truth is, it only looks at one aspect of multifamily. It doesn't talk about asset management, doesn't talk about the legalities of multifamily, doesn't talk about like the 50 other things that you need to know about multifamily. All it tells you is where to buy multifamily. So it was very incomplete, right? So we were like, okay, so let's design a website called Multifamily University. And what we'll do is, we'll take people that are like super studs in multifamily, they know 10 times as much as I do, and we'll call them in and do like these deep dive long webinars, some of them 2 hours long, just teaching content. And these people are amazing in that they've given it away. I have never paid a speaker a dime, and speakers are not allowed to do pitches on our platform. So I'm not ever really fully sure what they're getting out of it. Maybe it's just branding. I don't know. But they come in and they do these amazing events, and we do about 40 to 50 webinars a year, and about 75,000 people sign up for these webinars, right? So it's just this crazy community, and everyone's giving feedback. Our Facebook group is about to hit 10,000 people. It's phenomenal. I mean, yesterday, day before yesterday, somebody posted a question, and he received 91 responses to that question. The best way to build a community, I think, is to start with anything except the goal of building a community. I think that some of the communities that haven't been built from the very beginning, their goal was, we are going to build a bunch of people together in one place. I felt like that wasn't a good goal. I felt like a good goal was, we're going to find some really awesome stuff that nobody knows about and put it in this one place and make sure that people know about it.
Okay.
And I think that built a better community. They kept building on it. Multifamily University went beyond the concept of the real focus system. It just became one aspect of it. And then we started doing data reports. We started writing about areas in the US that people didn't know about. Like, for example, we got into this concept of corridors. Like, I'm very fanatic about corridors. People talk about this city is great and that city is great. I don't think that's right. I think what really happens is, at times in the US, certain corridors, which are always along freeways, become powerful. And of course, there's some cities in there. So 3 years ago, when somebody I know named Bruce Norris started talking about Florida, I published, and this was in 2017, you can Google it, an article called The Corridor of Opportunity, right? Or Neal Bawa's Corridor of Opportunity. And it defined a space that was 144 miles. And it started from above Orlando, so northeast of Orlando, running through Orlando along 4, going through Lakeland, hitting Tampa, turning south, heading down towards, Bradenton and a little bit further.
Okay.
And then a year later, I updated it to extend the corridor further from Bradenton through Sarasota, now ending in Cape Coral and Fort Myers. And then the final iteration of that corridor was, I started calling it a web, because it started to spread beyond the freeway to the villages and to other places. Like, it basically started going north of Freeway 4 and south of Freeway 4 and became a web, right? And then we found a second corridor. It was in Utah, from Logan to Springville, passing through Salt Lake City. And now my favorite corridor today is 59 miles between Austin and San Antonio, passing through New Braunfels and San Marcos. So we would start writing about this like geeky stuff. And we gathered this community of geeks. They're like, this is really great. And some other people are like, this is the most boring shit ever. Well, I think a lot of times it's compression. So if you look at, I say Lakeland might be a better opportunity than Orlando and Tampa because of compression. So the corridor is usually defined by 2 anchor cities, right? So in this case, it's Orlando in the east and it's Tampa in the west. And then the corridor then starts to extend. So from Orlando, it's now expanding up north toward Jacksonville, not quite all the way, but maybe another 40 or 50 miles. And then from Tampa, it's extending downwards towards Cape Coral and Sarasota. What I find is there's usually one city, 2 cities that are compressing. So San Antonio is only about 60 miles from Austin. And what I'd learned was the San Francisco Bay Area sort of became this compression area, and entire sections of freeway became cities. Like, cities just got plopped in, right? So Concord used to be a city, and Fremont used to be a city, and then in between there wasn't much. And then cities like Dublin appeared, cities like Danville sort of appeared over the last 20 or 25 years. So we realized that when you've got 2 anchor cities, the area in between gets filled in, and that area is much more profitable, right, than the cities themselves. So and then there's the secondary concept. Sometimes you don't get 2 cities in a corridor. Sometimes it's a primary that is becoming so powerful and creating so much profit for real estate that it drives its growth down in the direction of some freeway. So here's some examples, right? So Denver is really driving the growth of Fort Collins and Colorado Springs, right? It's the driver. The San Francisco Bay Area is responsible for Sacramento's growth. Tacoma benefits from Seattle. Olympia benefits from Tacoma. So what we started realizing is that what was happening is a city was actually driving the growth of all the other cities around it, and the bigger opportunity was always in the smaller cities. It wasn't in the large ones, because by the time you heard about the large ones, 50 million other people had too. So you were usually late. So it made sense to figure out, where's the growth now flowing? Like today, I don't feel like the right place to go to is Phoenix. I think it's Tucson, because so much money has been made in Phoenix in the last 4 or 5 years that those people are like, I bought something for 100,000, sold it for 200,000, bought it for 200,000, sold it for 400,000. I don't think it's going to double again. Where should I take my money and go? I live in Phoenix. Well, the answer is I should go to Tucson and buy it for 200,000. Hopefully it'll become 400,000 again, right? So I think that if you use data to figure out these compression cities, you start seeing patterns that are really amazing, and you can get really crazy returns, absolutely nuts sort of returns. That growth worldwide is slowing because of our ridiculously bad use of real estate. Ridiculously bad. We've crammed 50% of the world's population into 2% of the land mass. We say that we don't have space, which is nonsensical. Ever see a map of the US at night from space? Only about 3% of it is lit. Clearly, we have all the land in the world. But the problem was the jobs. The problem was the jobs were concentrated, especially the well-paying jobs were concentrated in certain areas. And so you had basically this 1 hour freeway radius around that. And that was the bubble of the US. That's ridiculously, crazily inefficient, right? And nobody's really addressed that. Just so you know, e-commerce is up 77% compared to last year. Usually grows about 10% a year. So we got 7 years of e-commerce growth in the last four months. 7 years, right? Just absolutely astonishing, absolutely mind-blowing. So right there, by the way, if you understand what are all the things that need e-commerce and what does e-commerce need, like logistics, warehousing, right? So you just in 4 months got 77% of growth. Well, we didn't create new warehouses. We didn't create new logistics. So guess what's going to happen? In the next 5 years, you're going to have a supply-demand crunch, because retail meltdown, that money is going somewhere. So, well, it has to go to warehousing, because warehousing is 1/3 the price per square foot. And that's what people need today, right? Warehousing to deal with this explosion in e-commerce. Now, in the same way, you apply that comment that we've been talking about people leaving the San Francisco Bay Area. Bruce has been talking about people are leaving and going to Florida. Yes, but how many? Hundreds of thousands. Yes, but what I believe is about to happen is that hundreds of thousands is now going to become millions. And when it becomes millions, it actually changes real estate. It changes the way that we've been doing real estate in this country. Today, what this means is that I am not as worried about secondary markets in the US crashing and burning, because job diversification is now a reality, and it's actually going to accelerate in the next 5 years. And if job diversity accelerates, then the smaller cities don't get hurt as much in the next recession as they would have in the past. So this is a paradigm shift, right? I do not believe that this thing where a recession happens and jobs come back to the center is going to happen in this recession or the next one. We actually haven't seen job losses in some of these smaller cities in the last 4 months. And you might not even have to do that. I think people are doing it anyway. So there's videos, watch them on the internet. New York has an 85% growth in apartment inventory in the last 4 months. 85% jump in inventory. That's catastrophic. Their rents, they're now, the average apartment owner is offering 2 months free. That's the norm, right? So that market is going to suffer because there's a huge number of people that are like all of a sudden free to leave. And yes, we know that 7 out of 10 of these people will come back. Maybe it's 8 out of 10. But you know that 2 out of 10 for such a large number is also an extraordinary number, and that creates a massive amount of change. It basically pivots the situation towards smaller cities, and I think that's a multi-decade pivot. Usually what happens is if you do those 5 metrics right, and there's a bunch of cities that do really well on those metrics, Salt Lake City, for example, Provo, Utah does really well, Orlando does really well, or at least it did until about 4 months ago. But when you see those metrics, people think culture is created first, and then because culture is created, the jobs come. That is a very popular myth. I think it's nonsense. What I've found is jobs are created, and that creates culture. So you look at Austin. Michael Dell built, started Dell there in 1994, and that built, Austin's story. And then 5 or 10 years after that, they started doing that big show, South by
South by
Southwest,
Southwest, yeah.
right? And that show started to build Austin's culture.
Mhm.
But that happened 10 years after the jobs came in. Now, if you take that example and apply it to a bunch of other cities, you'll start to see that their culture develops as they go. Silicon Slopes, I mean, the astonishing culture that Utah and Provo have was not there. I mean, a lot of this culture wasn't there 10 years ago. And a lot of the jobs moved because Adobe started to move jobs from the San Francisco Bay Area to Silicon Slopes, because they realized that their universities are phenomenal, and they're, 1/5 of the cost of our universities here. And so one company, I think Novell, started that move, and then it was followed by Adobe, and now basically just everybody, right? So Facebook, Amazon, and Google all opened billion-dollar locations there in the last 6 months. So I think it is not culture that makes a great city. It's these fundamentals that make a great city, and then the culture grows. It automatically grows, and some cities do it better, and some don't do it as well. And I think, like, for example, Austin now has developed a really cool culture, and so is Tucson. Tucson has a very artsy scene. Austin is the cheapest city in California. And they look at me for a second, and then they're like, oh yeah, right? It's like, yeah, they think of it, I mean, because they're like, no, it's the most expensive city in Texas. Like, no, it's not in Texas, it's in California, it's really cheap, right? And you
Mhm.
look at it that way, and people get it. It's like, so Austin has room to grow. Yes, it has decades to grow. What I found was, when I came up with list of powerful cities, I mean, you look at Salt Lake. They've just finished building a phenomenal train system. They're doubling the size of their airport. They're building an entire inland port that is larger than the size of Manhattan, right? Now, that's one example. But if I was to take like 10 of my favorite cities, and I'm probably not investing in 6 out of these 10, I just love their demographics, they're all doing great things. So the great things didn't lead to cities doing well. Cities doing well led to great things, right? And the opposite is also true. So one of my old-time favorite cities in America is Chicago, right?
Okay.
Phenomenal city, one of the great cities of the world, right? Not just of the US. But I tell people that it's a horrible thing to be investing in Chicago right now. And they basically say, why? And my answer is that great cities build great works, and Chicago seems to be consistently failing at building new great things. And the second thing is, they've managed to get themselves into a situation, and there's a little bit of jest in this, but get this, and this was pre-COVID, right? Pre-COVID, I said Chicago and Cook County, they have three choices: bankruptcy in 2 years,
Mm.
bankruptcy in 3 years, and bankruptcy in 4 years. Those are their three choices, right? When you have only those three choices and nothing else is possible, why would I want to go and invest in these great cities? I'm going to wait until that bankruptcy happens. Stockton cleaned up its act. Orange County cleaned up its act. Chicago, being one of the great cities of the world, will clean up its act. I'm just going to wait until the bankruptcy before I add Chicago to my list. Because today, it's horrible. Chicago, and you used to have a D grade on these sites that rank cities and their stability. It's gone from D to F. They've lost $2 billion in 4 months. And now we're at the point where within a few, I think 2 quarters or 3 quarters, they won't be able to pay interest, just interest on their loans.
Wow.
So that has to be a full stop. If you cannot pay interest on your loans, you can only do one thing. You can create a Ponzi scheme and get more money so that you can pay the interest. And now you have new interest, so you have to get even more money. You know how that ends, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's where it is. Chicago is months away from Ponzi scheme. So the first thing I look at is what asset classes are benefiting, right? What's happened, right? And I've always believed in public storage. But when I looked at public storage in the last 4 months, it hasn't done well. So I'm basically saying the data doesn't suggest that public storage is doing well, because all that new construction of public storage, some of which was not documented because it was mom and pop, is basically pulling down rents. Multifamily did pretty well in the last 4 months, but I'm a little hesitant because it seems to me that multifamily received a very large boost from the unemployment benefits. So I want to see how multifamily does for 2 months after the benefits expire. And as I'm looking at different asset classes, I'm looking at senior housing. I'm not so sure. Would you, if your grandma was in one of these big box facilities with 200 other aged people, would you leave her there, or would you just move her to your basement? But I think the biggest one is industrial. I keep saying this. E-commerce, 10% year over year is normal growth. 77% means that we've gotten 7.5 years of growth in 4 months. That growth is going to create supply shortages. We need 1 billion square feet of industrial in this country. Keep in mind, we're about to lose at least 500 million square feet of retail, right? This is a swap. It's not a net new gain. It's a swap. Money goes from one place to another place, right? Retail is going to see an absolute meltdown. I don't think hotels are going to be as bad as retail. I think robotics is the greatest threat to our economy in the short run. I mean, it is incredibly dangerous. But if you think about it, I'm more bullish on industrial because of robotics. Think about it. Robotics give you incredible salary advantages. Now you have these thousands of robots that are running around 2 million square foot warehouses that are mostly empty, right? Mm-hmm. It isn't my job to provide jobs for my citizens. I am not a politician, right? And I don't lead a city. It's my job to provide returns for my investors. Right. So from a social perspective, the rise of robotics is terrible for people, right? You can now have a 2 million square foot facility with only 100 workers, right, where 20 years ago, there'd be 5,000 people working there, right? I get that. But Aaron, why is that bad for industrial? It's good for industrial because what we're doing is we're swapping space for people, and people salaries are always more expensive than space. On a per square foot basis, if you can take 5,000 people and cut it down to 200, that 4,800 persons worth of saving is massive compared to the one-time investments in the robots. So the robots are here, they're here to stay, and it accelerates from here on. That's why I think industrial is a very powerful story. Does it have a colossal bad impact on our employment numbers in the US? Yeah, this is just the beginning. Yeah, one of the trends that I see is people are not just going to move from places like New York and Los Angeles to places like Phoenix or Salt Lake City. That's going to happen. But people are also going to move back to the suburbs. If you had to go into the office 4 times a week, you wanted to be 30 miles from work. But if you now have to go back to the office once a week or twice a week, you're going to be in a 50 or a 60-mile radius. So we had this movement back in the 2005, 2012 timeframe where people were beginning to go urban again. And then starting to 2016, it started to go the other way, where people were beginning to go suburban again. We started to see vacancies falling both in suburban multifamily and also in suburban office. And today, suburban office has the same vacancy as central business district, downtown office, right? Wow. So things have adjusted to the point where it's come a long way. There was a huge gap between the two, and it's now the same. Why? I'm not sure if people are following jobs or employers said, I don't want to pay $4 a square foot. I'm going to go pay $1.20 in a flexed industrial building in a suburb that allows me to open a location, right? So maybe they went first and then people followed them, or maybe people said we can't afford the central business district homes, so we're going to go out there again, and then the jobs sort of followed. But whatever happened, it happened. And so in 2020, in Feb, before COVID, we were already seeing this push back to suburbanization, and then COVID just massively accelerated the suburbanization. I think I'm more cautious than I was in Feb. And the reason for that is the premise of opportunity zones was the government is going to give you phenomenal tax benefits so that you and a bunch of other investors, highlight you and a bunch of other investors, are together going to put lots of money into opportunity zones. And because you put money in and they put money in, there was an all ships rising effect and lots of money was made. The area went up in value and everyone was happy and everyone made profits, right? Nobody really talks about what happens if that premise wasn't true and you were the only one that ended up investing in that opportunity zone and other people invested in other opportunity zones, not yours, right? Well, in that case, You built a class A asset in a class C distressed area with low incomes and no population growth. Both of these ways of looking at this. So I'm very cautious about opportunity zones, because opportunity zones really needed to, it's a good idea, but to grow it needed fertile ground. It needed the economy to be strong in 2019, and it was in 2020. It wasn't 2021. It's not going to be, and maybe not even 2022. So I think there's going to be some crash and burn stories that are going to come out of that area. But at the same time, I think that there are going to be certain opportunity zones where it's going to keep going. I just think that the outlook is not as bright as it was 4 months ago. Yeah, I feel like the developers, there's too many developers that people are giving money to that have never held assets. So one of the things when people ask me, who should I give money to in opportunity zones? Neal, you only have one project. It's been years. It's been funded. You don't intend doing any others. My advice was make sure you only give money to developers that by their nature hold assets, because 10 years is 2 recessions, maybe 3. If you give money to a developer and that developer basically gets fed up with the property, they're going to sell. Now, not only do you lose your profits, you also lose your tax benefits. Make sure you're giving your money to people that have asset management companies. They have employees managing assets, because 70% of developers don't manage anything. They're so in so much of a hurry, they don't even feel it. They give up that money to somebody else. They just basically sell empty buildings as soon as they're done with them, right? And which always strikes me as stupid, because like if you just filled it up, you'd make a lot more money. But their whole model is, no, I'm done with this. I don't want anything to do with it. Somebody take it off my hands, go fill it yourself, and I'll give you that extra delta for it. When a developer thinks like that, to be in bed with them for 10 years, with you going in with one of the biggest recessions of all time, doesn't sound the best opportunity out there. It could be. I mean, and one of the key things, Aaron, is, and people say, I was on the Realty Mogul podcast, and Jillian Hellman, Realty Mogul CEO, asked me, what keeps you up at night, Neal? We have all these deadbeat countries that have been in deep trouble for a long time: Japan, Italy, Greece. We have deadbeat economies in the US that are in trouble, parts of New Jersey, Cook County, and Chicago. We have all these places that were one domino away from just falling apart. What hasn't happened yet, but is a certainty to happen, is that a big domino falls. People are like, yeah, but Greece went bankrupt. The world economy didn't stop. Greece isn't, Greece is a fraction of 1%. What if Italy goes bankrupt? Italy is more than 1% of the world economy. The shock waves would be colossal. Cook County is a $500 billion economy. The economy of Greater Chicago is bigger than most countries in the world. So to me, this is not like Stockton or Orange County declaring bankruptcies. Those are localized events. This is something that shakes an entire country to its core. And if it happens with Italy, it's going to shake the Eurozone to its core. So to me, those dominoes are ahead of us. They cannot possibly have happened yet. But in the next 6 months, I think a major domino falls. There's 500 articles written about the fact that their options are basically about when they're going to declare bankruptcy and how to do that legally, because unfortunately they have issues with how to declare bankruptcy, right? But at some point, it just cannot happen anymore. And I mean, even economies like California, Aaron, I mean, the deficits that we're piling up month over month are just staggering. It's decades of deficits that we're piling up in months. So there's major challenges to deal with here. But I think major challenges mean major opportunity. I mean, right now we should be doing, looking at buying, foreclosures. If the foreclosures don't exist, maybe we should be doing lease options. All that stuff that worked back in 2008, it's going to start working in about 5 to 6 months. Well, on the macroeconomic side, I like to read John Malden. I think he's phenomenal. His newsletter that comes in every week is just an incredible place to go. There's Real Vision TV. Those guys are pretty strong as well. So I like to read the macro because it affects everything that we do. On the real estate side, obviously, I read everything that your dad has written. That's kind of, he's my go-to guy on the data side. And then I follow a guy named, I wish he kind of was a little more flashy. His name's Ingo Windsor, and he runs Local Market Monitor. And Ingo has now won the Crystal Ball Forecasting Award 3 years in a row. So, He's not flamboyant enough. He needs some lessons from Elon Musk. I think the best way, there's two ways. They're both simple. First one is, it is my extreme good luck and bad luck to be the only Neal Bawa on the worldwide internet. So if you type in Neal space BAWA, the first like 200 articles are all about me. So if someone's flaming me, you're going to find it very quickly.
Okay.
And then the second way is Multifamily University, which is multifamilyu.com. That's multifamily by the letter u.com. We do 40 plus webinars. You're going to like them. You're going to like them. They're different kinds. We just did one where we talked about how the real estate market in the last 10 years is being entirely driven by the banking system, not by fundamentals, but by the banking system and what it does. So that was a very interesting webinar. We got lots of kudos out of that. So we do these kinds of crazy deep dive things. So check it out, multifamilyU.com.